library of outlines that help me often in putting together these topics for our services on Sunday. This morning, the thing that I want to talk to you about centers around Luke chapter 12 and verse 13 through 21. It'll be our starting text this morning is Luke 12, 13 through 21. Topic being wealth and the use of wealth and how those things affect us and what true wealth is. So we'll pick this up in verse 13, chapter 12 of Luke. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to me, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns, and I will build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods, laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So we go through this, we see that someone approaches Jesus and asks him to settle a dispute over an inheritance. Jesus declined. He said that he wasn't his occupation. This wasn't what his business, right, was deciding these types of disputes. But he pointed out the root of the problem. Not just the root of the problem between the two brothers, but the root of the problem in general. We know this without even knowing any of the facts, that the problem here that he's going to point to is greed. Whether it was one of them keeping back more than they should or the other one demanding more than was proper, greed was the root cause of the problem. Greed, covetousness, the love of money, however you phrase it, lies as the root of many sins. We see this talked about in 1 Timothy chapter 6. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 6 says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. But as for you, O man of God, flee these things. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness." Now, the man that we're talking about in the story, there's nothing in the story to indicate that he came by anything that he came by through ill-gotten means. It doesn't say that he was a robber or a thief or that he cheated anyone to amass the fortune. As a matter of fact, by reference, it presents him as someone who is honest, who is a farmer, who worked very hard to amass what he amassed, who had, through hard work and potentially some good luck with the weather, that he had a particularly good year. And how was he going to handle it? Now keep in mind that what was being addressed originally, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." That's the question that originally prompted the story, right? So you say, what is the story about this rich man and what he did have to do with these two brothers and they're asking for someone to settle the dispute? He was pointing out to them that the thing that they were worried about wasn't the thing that they should be worried about. That's what he was trying to tell them. When you look at the man in the story that he told, the farmer, he says in verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. It's interesting that he brings in to the story about this man and his survival, the soul, as if those goods that were laid up would benefit the soul. And he draws the conclusion in the end that they do not. This night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? The things that he prepared were not going to benefit him. The things that he thought were going to be to his great benefit and provide him security and stability were not going to provide him security or stability. He imagined they would, but the truth is that they weren't. These two brothers were arguing about the same thing. They were seeking stability. They were seeking what most people seek, which is peace. And they were seeking it by arguing about this inheritance. Both of them seeing it as something that would help them to be more secure, more stable. The response was to let them know that what they were fighting about wasn't what they thought that they were fighting about. The man that was presented as the Amish farmer, he measured his success the wrong way. He was taking account of the wrong things. He was considering the wrong things. Jesus told the story to point out that life does not consist of how much you have. Luke 12 and 15 tells us this. Luke chapter 12 and verse 15 says, "And he said to them, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Very clearly stated there. He's telling this man the same thing. Wealth is a rich man's security. It's a worldly man's security, but it's not the security of godly men. Proverbs 18 and 11 clearly tells us this. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 11 says, "A rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall." But then look at the end. Look at the end of 18 and 11. Like a high wall in his imagination. That wealth creates a high wall, but only in his imagination, not in reality. In reality, it protects him from nothing. He just thinks it protects him. There's a lot of people that put their security, their worry, their fear, all that, and they think that wealth protects those things. But it only protects them in their imagination. In reality, it protects nothing. Life extends beyond the world. So those worldly protections ultimately come to nothing. 1 Timothy 6 and 7 tells us that. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 7 says, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world." My father-in-law was fond of saying that he never saw a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. This was his way of saying this exact thing. That you may amass a lot of things in this world, but none of it's going with you. None of your physical possessions are going to help you in the end. Riches are also unstable. The rich man recognized this. His security was that by having all these riches, by building these new barns, it would provide him more security, right? Against what? Instability. But the reality is that they don't provide you security against instability. Many people who have many things lose them all. Many people who have many things don't lose the things, but lose their life. The stability can't come from the things. That's what he's trying to say. Peace can't come from things. Proverbs 23 and 4. Proverbs 23 and 4 through 5 says, "Do not toil to acquire wealth, be as discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven." How can wealth measure success when it comes and goes, seemingly as it pleases? I've seen this in my life. I've seen men work very hard to amass masses of things. And then just through some circumstance, not necessarily through any fault of their own, they lose it all. They lose it all, and they lose it all quickly. I've seen the opposite happen. where people did very little and ended up with great wealth. Both can happen. The instability of wealth cannot be the basis of stability. Proverbs 27:2. Proverbs 27 and verse 2 says, "Let another praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, not your own lips." Sometimes we decide what determines whether or not we succeeded in life the wrong way. This is what he's trying to tell this man. The thing that you're worried about is not the thing you should be worried about. You guys are in this great fight about this inheritance, right? The thing that you're worried about, the thing that you're fighting over, is not an important thing. That's what he's trying to tell the man. You could fight over it today and be gone tomorrow. It's not the thing that matters. He's trying to direct this man to the thing that matters. When we judge ourselves, when we look at ourselves, we don't need to look at ourselves the way the world looks at us. The world judges men and women by what they amass, by what they own, by what they have. It's not how God judges us. In 2 Corinthians 10 and 12, 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, it says, "Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding." This is his idea of looking at your neighbor and looking at the guy across the street and looking at the guy down the street and trying to figure out, well, how valuable am I? Instead of looking at God and what he's told you to do and the love that you're supposed to be giving to the world and deciding from that what your value is. The true measure of success is not found in the eyes of men. It's found in the eyes of God. In 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 4, chapter 4, verse 4 of 1 Corinthians, it says, "For I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me." Now, people will judge. People will judge success and failure. They'll decide whether you are successful. They'll decide whether you're a failure. They'll decide whether you're good. They'll decide whether you're not good. But in the end, only one judgment matters. And it's the Lord's judgment. Because the Lord has the ability to do something that no one else has the ability to do. To weigh the hearts of men. In Proverbs 21 and 2, it tells us this: "Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart." The heart is critical. These two men were not worried about their hearts. These two men were worried about their bodies. These two men were not worried about their souls. These two men were worried about their bodies. These two men were not worried about the spirit. These two men were worried about the world. So he told them a parable about a man who was worried about the world, who both his stress and his peace were to come from the world. And the story was there to point out how ridiculous it is to think that the world, that the peace of the world or the stresses of the world are important. Because in the end, they don't matter at all. The message is not just for them, the message was for us. It was recorded in the Scripture through the Holy Spirit. The apostles and the prophets teach us this throughout the Scriptures, not just there. In Proverbs 21 and 2, it says that the Lord weighs the heart. All measure of success is in spiritual things. He missed his opportunity to do good with his surplus. But it was not the surplus that created his priorities. This farmer that he gives the example of, instead of doing something with what he had, right, he chose to use it to try to seek worldly stability, right? He wanted to make sure that his body was taken care of. And not that others were taken care of, but that just he was taken care of. He could have used it for so many things that God had told him to do. But he chose to use it for the thing that he thought was best, to take care of his body. One of the joys of working is the opportunity to help others. This is pointed out in Ephesians 4:28. Ephesians 4:28 says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands." And then it tells you why. So that he may have something to share with anyone in need. That's why. That's why work. Something is shared. It doesn't need to be a lot. It doesn't need to be significant. It doesn't need to be a lot to be significant. But when you don't share in little, please do not fool yourself into thinking you will share in abundance. Because you won't. If you're not a person that has nothing and won't share the little bit of nothing you have, when you have much, you won't share that either. The heart is the heart. The way that you look at the world is the way you look at the world. The amount, the quantity won't change that. Sharing in abundance is not greater than sharing the little that you have either. When we look at things through the Spirit, not through the eyes of the world. Of course, in the eyes of the world, if I give someone $1 million, the world says that's much better than if I gave him $100. The world says if I give somebody $1,000, that's much better than me giving them one meal. From the standpoint of the world, that's true. The way the world counts things. The math is right. We have fooled ourselves. We've been accustomed to seeing things that large quantities are more significant than small ones. Because in businesses that we run in the world, more is better than little. When we keep the books, large profits are better than small profits. But we're not talking about the world. That's what we're being pointed out to. We're not talking about the world. The world doesn't matter. What we're talking about is spirit. Spiritually, the quantity is not important. The love is. The love is what's important, not the amounts. Jesus, in Luke 21 and 1 through 4, in Luke 21 and 1 through 4, we read, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. But he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty, but in all she had to live on." You don't need a lot to do a lot. You don't need a lot to do a lot. You don't need a lot for God to be proud of what you do. He was proud of this widow. Christ looked at this widow and said, she's given more than all the rest of them put together. Even though she gave the least. Now, a businessman, a person of the world would look at that and say, well, that's not true. She gave a lot less than they did. But we need to look at what God has to say and not what men have to say. In Luke 3 and 11, we read again, and he answered them, "Whoever has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise." This is not a command to a group. This is a command to us as individuals, as individual people, as Christians, as the children of God. And look what it's talking about in 3:11. Look what it uses as the example. A shirt. If you have 2 shirts and somebody has no shirts, give them a shirt. A shirt is not a thing, especially in the modern world, of great value. It was of more value back then because they had to make it by hand, right? So it was a lot of work, a lot of effort went into making this clothing. But still, it was not a thing of extreme value. Food, same thing, was not a thing of extreme value, right? Everyone had food, because if they didn't have food, they would die. So it was a commodity that a lot of people had. Still a commodity that a lot of people have. The key is not to focus on the two things, but to point out this, that those two things were fairly small in the grand scheme of things. We're not talking about barns full of grain. We're talking about small things. The man's focus was solely on himself. Ecclesiastes 11, 1 through 2. Ecclesiastes 11, 1 through 2 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you may find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth." What is it saying? It's saying, do good with what you can do good with. You don't know how much time you have. What we know is that we're to live in the day that we're in, to do what we can do in the day that we're in, every day. Get up and do it again. It's not that it's not good to plan. It's not that it's not good to save, because we have Bible commands to do that, to plan and to save. The example of the ant is one of the examples that we have. To put away, because there will be famine, there will be feast. To be responsible with what you have. It's not what I'm talking about. There's nothing in the Bible that tells you not to be responsible, not to plan, not to think ahead. This idea, though, is that when your love of the world and your judgment of how the world is, and your judgment of where stability comes from, and your judgment of where peace comes from, clouds you to the level of this man, what you do is you do nothing in the Spirit, because you're completely focused on the world, which is Satan's whole job, is to focus you on the world so you do nothing in the Spirit, to keep you loving the world so you have no time to love God. In that verse in Ecclesiastes 11, he's telling us not to focus on ourselves. While it's good to plan and save, we cannot let our plans interfere with our generosity. Because in Luke 12 and 29, we see what our ultimate retirement plan is. Luke 12, 29 through 34 says, "And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." What do we focus on? What are we spending our time on? Building peace here, or building the kingdom? Worrying about the earth, or worrying about heaven? Where are we building our treasure? Because he's right. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. And where your heart is, that's where you will put your treasure. The proper use of wealth in 1 Timothy 6 and 17. 1 Timothy 6 and 17 through 19, it says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life." We have to recognize that sharing and loving others requires us not to be proud, thinking that we are doing something on our own, or that we have some kind of control. God putting something in our hands tests us on how well we use it. If I give one child more than he needs and the other nothing, what would I hope the child who had more would do? If I have two children and I hand one a big plate of food and the other one nothing, what would I hope the child with the big plate of food would do? What would please my heart as their father? To see that child share with their brother, with their sister, or to see them devour it all themselves and go seeking a second plate? As a parent, I know which thing would make me the most proud. Why? Because it shows love for their brother, for their sister. In Isaiah 58 and 5 through 8, it says, "Is such the fast that I choose, a day for a person to humble himself? It is to bow down his head like a reed and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him. Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not the fast that I choose to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke? It is not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard." He found happiness in the wrong thing. The rich man found peace and happiness in the wrong thing. He looked to the treasures of earth. Those treasures that he laid up for himself on earth were moss and rust destroy. To find joy in something fleeting is foolish. The believer's joy is not in these things. The believer's joy is in God. Philippians 4 and 4 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." Not in your things. Not in your earthly power. Not in your earthly possessions. But in the Lord. Proverbs 27 and 1 says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." That brings humbleness. If you understand what that is saying, it is saying that you have no control. Again, God calls us to plan, right? But to plan with this understanding that we have no control over the next day or the day after that. To keep us humble, to keep us focused on what our real work is, which is that spiritual work. Loving God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. Loving our neighbor as ourselves. Loving God requires us to keep his commandments because keeping his commandments is love for him. Loving our neighbor requires them to put them before the things of this world. He thought he knew the future. He thought he knew what was going to happen. But he didn't. He didn't know what a day would bring. Consider that if we reserve all of our good deeds for the future, when we are better prepared, they will most often never be done. Consider also that it is arrogance to think that you know what comes tomorrow. Life's too short. Life is too unpredictable. James 4 and 13 through 15. James 4 and 13 through 15 says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year and there trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." Again, look at James 4 and 13 through 15. It doesn't say don't plan. It doesn't say that you can't plan for the future. You should. God calls us to be wise and to be good stewards. It doesn't say don't plan, but it says plan with understanding of humbleness of what the goal is and the fact that you don't have any control. To focus all of your plans on God. The Lord wills we will live and do this or that. He underlies everything. His will be done, not our own. Too many times when we accrue wealth in this world, we believe we control and we want to exert our own will. instead of his. In Psalms 39 and 6, it says, surely a man goes about as a shadow, surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather it. Because he trusted wealth, he made no preparations. Psalm 52 and 7 through 8. Psalm 52, 7 through 8 says, see the man who would not take God as refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, and sought refuge in his own destruction. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. Preparation and planning should be focused on spiritual wealth, not on worldly wealth. When we're thinking about our future, we think about our future spiritually, not in the world. Do the two things touch each other? They absolutely do. That's what life's about. That's what makes life hard, is the world and the spirit intertwined. The rich man's mistakes are common ones. Will you see the danger in it, or will you walk on by? In Proverbs 22 and 3, it says, the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. A warning was given to them and to us about this dispute over these worldly things that they inherited. The fool wants life to operate on his own rules. So want to listen to God. Wants to do things what he sees fit. Proverbs 14 and 16. One who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless. Enough time has passed for making mistakes. In 1 Peter 4 and 1 through 3, it says, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. Turn to lay your treasures up in heaven. We need to begin laying those treasures in heaven. We need to seek those out every day to lay those treasures up in heaven. Every day, look around for all the ways. They don't have to be big. Too many people struggle for big, and they never get anywhere because they're always trying to get to the big. There's little things every day, little people that need help. Everyone needs the gospel. So many ways for us to lay up treasures in heaven that we walk by because we're seeking something big. Usually we're seeking something that requires the world or lays treasures up in it. So ask yourself every day, how am I going to use today to lay treasures up in this world or to lay treasures up in heaven? The focus for a Christian should always be heaven. We use everything that the world gives us toward that purpose. Talked a lot this morning about becoming a Christian. But this is all part of it. When we become a Christian, when we hear the word for the first time, we realize we've been lost. We realize that we've been without purpose. We didn't know why we were here, what we were doing, and then we find out who created us, where we came from, what our goal is, what our purpose is here in this life, and we find out that life is not about life. Life's not about this world. Everybody out there is running around thinking life's about the world. Then you hear the word, and then you realize that life is about the Spirit, not the world, and that I want to change. I don't want to rebel against God. I don't want to continue in my rebellion. I've been a rebel against God. I want to instead be one of his people. I want to confess those sins. I want to repent, confess, be baptized for the remission of the sins. To turn, to go down into that grave of baptism and be raised up in newness of life. And then to spend the rest of my life serving God. Not serving the world. Not looking for the world, but looking for the Spirit. Serving him every way that I can. If you need our assistance or help in any way, we invite you. We would be happy to pray for you or anything that you need. Come forward as we sing.